The Thompson family lived in the small town of Pine Ridge, where life moved slowly and traditions were passed down from generation to generation. George and Lydia Thompson were devout practitioners of the Christian faith, and their lives revolved around the local church. They deeply believed in God's goodness and instilled this belief in their three children: Nathan, 12, Emma, 9, and little Jacob, just 6. The Thompson home was filled with joy and unity, but a shadow threatened to change everything when, during a routine checkup, George was diagnosed with a serious and unexpected illness. The doctor's words still echoed in Lydia's mind. "Your husband has a rare and serious condition affecting the nervous system. There is no known cure, and his time is limited." The following days were a mix of silent tears, prayers, and uncertainty. George, a man who had always been the rock of the family, began to weaken. The faith he had always proclaimed seemed to be tested, and Lydia didn't know how to keep hope alive. She sought comfort in the Bible, where she read stories of miracles that seemed impossible. It was on one of those nights while reading the Gospel of John that the story of Lazarus' resurrection touched her heart. Lydia felt as if that passage was written for her, a reminder of Jesus' power over life and death. As George faced pain and difficult days, Lydia decided they should intensify their prayers, and together they began to gather with friends and neighbors at the church, asking for divine intervention. The children, even without fully understanding, joined in the prayers with the innocence and purity that only children possess. Emma, in particular, was very close to her father and spent hours by his side, reading Bible stories. She believed with all her heart that God would hear their pleas. Over time, news of George's illness spread, and the faithful in the town began to pray for him. The congregation organized vigils and weekly prayer meetings, and the small church became a symbol of hope for all who knew the Thompson family. The community's faith was so solid that it seemed unshakable, and many believed that God would answer their prayers. However, as George's condition worsened, Lydia struggled against the fear that threatened to suffocate her faith. On certain nights, she found herself questioning God's will. Why my husband? Why now? But even in anguish, she turned back to the scriptures, seeking strength in the words of comfort and the stories of healing that Jesus performed. The days for the Thompson family became a silent battle. George, now weaker, required continuous care, and Lydia had to take the lead at home. She kept up appearances for the children, hiding the tears and doubts that constantly welled up in her heart. The pain of watching her husband wither away was unbearable, but she fought to maintain faith and courage. At night, when everyone was asleep, Lydia would kneel by the bed and cry out to God. She believed, despite everything, that a miracle was possible. As Lydia tried to strengthen her faith, Nathan, the oldest son, felt increasingly confused and distressed. He remembered the stories he had heard about Jesus' miracles, but now, in the face of his father's suffering, he began to question what it all meant. One night during one of those prayer sessions, he approached his mother and asked with a trembling voice, "Why is God letting Daddy suffer so much? Doesn't he love us?" The question echoed in Lydia's heart, and she realized that her children's faith was also being tested. She hugged him, and with tear-filled eyes told him that God had a purpose, even if they couldn't understand it now. Emma, who had always been very close to her father, began to develop her own ritual. Every day upon returning from school, she would sit next to George and read to him the healing stories of Jesus. Her childlike voice, filled with hope and confidence, filled the room, and George felt comforted. One day she read the passage about the man born blind, and upon finishing, said with all conviction, "Daddy, if Jesus can make the blind see, he can also heal you." George looked at his daughter and saw in her eyes the faith that he himself might be losing. The town of Pine Ridge united even more to the cause of the Thompsons. Neighbors began to visit the house, bringing meals and offering help with the children. The community, even those who did not attend church, seemed moved by a solidarity that went beyond the ordinary. There was something in the Thompsons' pain that reminded everyone of their own fragility and need for faith. In prayer meetings, the voices of dozens of people rose in unison, asking for George's healing, a healing that was not just for him, but for all who were there. Even with all the support, moments of weakness and despair became increasingly frequent. Lydia continued to struggle against fear, And one night, in a moment of extreme anguish, she isolated herself in her room and cried out in tears, asking God why the miracle was not happening. It was as if all her hope was crumbling, as if her prayers were falling into the void. She spent hours like that, on her knees, until a deep peace flooded her heart. It was not the answer she expected, but it was as if a divine presence was there with her, holding her in her moment of despair. That same week, something unusual happened. Emma, after finishing reading a passage from the Bible to her father, said she had had a dream the night before. She recounted that in her dream, she saw Jesus touching George's chest, and as he did so, a bright light emanated from him, healing him. Emma, with the innocence of a child, believed that dream was a sign, and this brought new hope to Lydia. She did not know if it was a divine response or just her daughter's fertile imagination, but that dream became a symbol of hope, something to cling to. The days dragged on, and although George remained weak, his condition stabilized. The doctors had no explanation for this, as they expected a rapid decline, but he was still there, fighting, resisting. Each new day was a gift for the family, and Lydia felt that perhaps this was the miracle she had been praying for. Not a complete healing, but the presence of God sustaining them in the midst of pain. Nathan began to participate more in the prayer vigils, seeking answers to the doubts that tormented him. He still did not understand the reason for his father's suffering, but something within him began to change. He realized that, even with all the suffering, there was a greater strength, something that transcended his understanding. He saw his mother, a strong and resilient woman, remain steadfast in her faith, and this inspired him. Faith, he began to understand, was not the absence of pain, but the courage to face pain with hope. One day, observing his father's fragility and his mother's strength, Nathan felt an impulse to pray alone, something he had never done before. He went out to the yard where the starry sky seemed infinite, and in a low voice, he asked God to give him strength to understand and accept what was happening. The prayer was simple, but it was sincere, and for the first time, Nathan felt a deep relief, a sense of peace he could not explain. Lydia, observing the changes in her children, realized that although George's physical healing might not be within their reach, something deeper was happening. Their family was being transformed. They were discovering a faith that did not depend on visible miracles, but on a quiet and unwavering trust in God. Emma continued to read to her father, and each time she spoke of the words of Jesus, it was as if her faith renewed that of everyone around her. The prayer meetings began to hold even greater significance for the Thompson family and for the entire community. Now they prayed not only for George's healing, but for the healing of their own souls. Their faith had shifted from a fragile hope for a miracle to a serene certainty that God was with them, in every moment, in every tear, in every shared smile. As time passed, George's health fluctuated, but the illness advanced slowly, like a creeping shadow. The children had already accepted that their lives would never be the same. The prayers did not cease, and the community remained steadfast by the family's side, but Lydia realized that they might need more. In a candid conversation with the pastor, she confessed, "I still believe that God can heal George, but I feel that perhaps it is our faith that he is strengthening, not my husband's body." The pastor listened to her words attentively and shared something he had experienced himself. "Sometimes, Lydia, the true miracle is what God does in our hearts. It may be that this journey is a testimony for all of us, something that will teach us what it truly means to trust." These words stayed with Lydia, and she began to notice small daily miracles. Nathan's renewed faith, the kindness Emma showed in caring for their father, and the quiet peace that Jacob, the youngest, exuded while being by his father's side, gently holding his hand without saying a word. George, even with his weakened health, continued to smile at his children, demonstrating love and serenity. He had become a symbol of hope and faith for everyone around. One day, Emma decided to do something special for her father. She prepared a surprise, gathering several people from the church in front of their house to sing hymns of praise. When George was brought outside, he was visibly moved to see so many people united, and he felt enveloped by a deep peace. The hymns, sung by voices he knew well, resonated not only in his ears but in his heart. He realized that his life, even in the days of greatest fragility, had become an inspiration for many. Lydia, seeing her husband's serene smile, realized that George's healing might not lie in physical recovery, but in the transformation he had caused in each one around him. He who had always been a rock for the family had shown that in vulnerability there was also strength. His words, his gestures, and his unwavering faith, even in the face of suffering, would remain with them all, no matter what happened. When night fell, George asked the family to gather around him. His voice was weak, but his gaze had a special glow. He spoke of the love he felt for each one, expressing gratitude for walking alongside him on this journey. He then quoted a Bible passage that had comforted his heart during the most difficult moments. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The words, simple and profound, reflected the peace and acceptance he had found. At dawn, George, with a slight smile on his face, departed in peace, surrounded by his family, in a moment of sacred silence. Lydia, feeling a mix of pain and relief, realized that he was free from pain, and that his love and faith would live on eternally in their hearts. The miracle, she understood, was not a physical healing, but a spiritual and emotional healing that transformed all their lives.